Good morning. Thank you to our media partners for being with us this morning and to those watching. Yesterday, Governor Cooper modified the stay-at-home order, and here to discuss the CMPD's management of that is Deputy Chief Estes. Chief?
Thank you and good morning. As many of you know, the governor issued an order yesterday to slow the spread of COVID-19. I'm sure you're all keeping up with the numbers that's been put out there across the state. You know, we're up, and I think some of the prevailing thought is that we need to try to get ahead of this so that we can prevent a larger impact on the hospitals and hospitalization rates. And so, as part of that, the restriction of travel from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. was enacted by the governor, and also closing of some businesses during that time. And of course, with the rest of the order, CMPD, as the primary law enforcement agency here in Mecklenburg County, along with our other law enforcement agencies here, are responsible for the enforcement of that order if anybody should be not adhering to the restrictions. As we have before, we will continue to be operating on a complaint-driven basis primarily. We won't be using this order, the governor's order, after the 10 p.m. hour as a means to set up checkpoints or just conduct traffic stops specifically and solely for the order. However, that doesn't preclude officers who come across people in the ordinary performance of their duties to question or ask or even enforce the order. We, in this matter, as we do in all matters, we give our officers discretion in which to appropriately and fairly enforce all laws, including this one. So we continue to get a tremendous level of cooperation from the public and from our business partners. Although we have issued citations to businesses, 25 or more businesses have been issued citations for violations of the order, and some others have been dealt with by ABC Commission and others for not adhering to the alcohol practices involved. So to reiterate, we'll continue to operate on a complaint-driven basis primarily. We won't be using this order this portion of the order as a sole means for a stop in traffic or to set up checkpoints, but that doesn't preclude officers from investigating or finding out what's going on with an individual under the normal course of their duties. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for any questions that you may have.
If an officer is just doing their normal patrol, driving around, let's say they see a busy bar, busy restaurant, you say it's up to their discretion if they want to go in and maybe start that conversation, or is there direction to do that, or is it only really when someone says, hey, there's a crowd at blah, blah, blah?
Well, generally, it's only when we get a complaint. If you see a busy bar that doesn't, as long as they're adhering to the internal seating capacity, whatever. Now, after 10 o'clock, be a different matter. We have internal protocols where we direct officers to places that we may see that's full. You can even have a anonymous complaint that comes through. We respond to those as well. So it can be an in-person or phone complaint that we follow up on.
So people are supposed to be, if I understand correctly, wherever they're going to be for the night by 10 p.m. So how are you all going to enforce that? Let's say if there is a house party or something that you get word of, what do you do from there?
Yeah, we get a house party is very difficult in order for us to proactively do, because we don't know if it's a house party or it just happens to be a large family with a bunch of cars there. So that's why we act on a complaint-driven basis. So if we get somebody who has some knowledge that it actually is a party versus a large family, then of course we will, through our regular 911 model, would go and respond to the call and then question and find out what's going on there. Nothing has changed from how we did that yesterday, from how we'll do that Friday. It's just the 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. deal with travel. And the whole intent of the order is that instead of, my personal opinion, instead of going back to where we're at a stay-at-home order for 24 hours of the day, I think the governor's intent was to limit those 8 hours at night, that people would stay home then and try to curb some of the parties, private parties, and some of the business who have been outliers. That's my intent, and we're going to approach the enforcement of it that way.
And what's the penalty? Let's say you do come across a huge party what happens to them?
Yeah, well, it depends. It's still a violation, a criminal violation. It's a misdemeanor. So therefore, all of the penalties that are associated with that class misdemeanors are in play, but it could be everything from verbal warning through citations, et cetera. Most of the times we've seen the house parties that we break up, we generally know about them if they're being advertised. We've had very good results in breaking those up before they ever even start. So in a case like that, we may warn the person, hey, you can't have house parties, et cetera. Or if if a guest shows up and sees that many people, we may choose to warn, or we may cite them, and if we deem that's appropriate. Repeat offenders generally are the ones we target for more rigorous enforcement.
I have some questions about Chief Jennings. Can you say anything about how he was exposed to the virus, whether other people were exposed as a result?
Yeah, so what I'll tell you is that contact tracing can be very difficult to do, and we leave that mainly up to our in-house personnel working with the public health professionals to do that. What we think is that on December the 2nd, Chief Jennings traveled to a violence and adverse childhood experiences conference with Judge Trosh and our local district attorney here. They traveled together on a plane. It was a private plane that was a group where it was able to charter for them to save both on time and taxpayers' funds and for the expediency for the trip. After that, the next day he learned that Judge Trosh had some symptoms and was positive, and so immediately upon that, learning of that, he quarantined himself. As is our normal protocol when there's exposure like that, we immediately start to arrange testing after the incubation period and with close consultation with our public health officials. After the test, Chief Jennings came out that he was positive. So as has been our practice, since he quarantined, as soon as he was exposed, he's limited to the exposure. I can tell you that Chief Jennings has practiced very good PPE measures and practices, both during that flight and subsequent times after. But as we all know, this disease is spread very easily, and we believe at this time that that's possibly where he was exposed, though no one can be 100% sure, I believe. He's doing well, resting at home. Just was on a call with him this morning. We're conducting business as usual. Myself and the rest of the executive team is carrying on operations in a seamless manner.
Is there anyone who possibly could have been exposed on December 3rd before he learned he had been exposed?
Now, possibilities are endless. I will say that every single precaution that you can take, he took. Social distance, wore his mask the entire time, hand washing, et cetera. He did to ensure that there was no further potential exposure. I can tell you that in the intervening time, any event that he may have done or seen, he practiced that PPE measure to protect himself and others, as he's done for the entire time.
And were those measures taken while he was on that private flight?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the questions that we asked. Hey, what was the circumstances? And everyone on the flight was masked up the entire time, other than I think to drink a cup of coffee or whatever. But as I said, and this really could be a lesson to everybody, that the disease spreads easily. So if you find yourself that when you're in close quarters or whatever, mask up. I mean, it works and it's effective.
Since the beginning of the pandemic, how many officers have tested positive? We used to get some updates. I know you might not have the exact number, but can you give me a ballpark of how many of that?
We have, I wrote that down in case you asked.
It's 111 page.
111.
Yeah, 111, and I believe, Chief, you had referenced there's 20 currently that are out tested positive and 30 in the protocol?
Yeah, so 20 positive currently, and then we've got 30 more, I guess, that are out for precautionary. It's that second number that I'd really like to outline, and we've done this from the beginning, and I think that's why our exposure rate has been fairly low. I think we're around 5% around positive, and I think national average is around 10 or so. But that's because when we do get a potential exposure, we're very conservative on this end to protect our workforce. When we get a potential exposure, we go ahead and put them out. And we go ahead and just, bite the bullet, as they say, to make sure we manage any further exposures that we've had in the workplace. I hazard to say 99% of our exposures have been from family and friends to the officers, and then we're generally able to catch that before we get exposure to other officers. And I'd like to say that's the same way it worked with Chief Jennings' case, which is why we put him out as soon as we knew that there was a potential exposure.
I know CMPD is down officers. Is accommodating those 20 to 30 absences, is that a challenge?
Well, any time we have officers out, it's a challenge, but we're able to absorb that number being out just by managing schedules at this point. You know, when it'd have to be, you know, higher than that to really affect operations. And what we would do, we would begin to draw down from extemporaneous units down into patrol and operations to be able to you know, manage that. So far, so good. Knock on wood, we've been able to manage what we've had to do so far.
Back to some of the restriction enforcement, you know, some of the businesses that have been cited, I know have been visited a couple times, and now they've been cited most recently, and, you know, we hear the same names over and over again. What would your message be to those business owners and the businesses that have been problems in the past when it comes to COVID-19 violations?
Yeah, we really do ask they be responsible. We're working with the ABC Commission if there's any type of alcohol nexus, and we'll, you know, we've talked about alcohol licensing issues before. The commission has, as of late, been very responsive, but we'll continue down our enforcement efforts if they continue not to comply. I mean, most of the businesses have been understanding and doing their best. The few outliers that we haven't, we've tried to escalate the enforcement as we've gone on.
And then follow up, how many times, so I know it's education first approach, so you visit, is it visit 1 time, 2 times, 3 times before they're cited? Is there a number?
No, you know, we can go the first time and a person is just, you know, obstinate and just defiant, and yeah, we're going to be, and that might get a citation there. If they're genuinely, we believe, generally trying, then we'll try to work with them. Multiple visits after we've educated you, of course, we'll continue to cite. It can be 1 or it can be 3. I mean, it just kind of depends.
So obviously the governor comes up with whatever restrictions he feels is necessary, and then you guys have to go and enforce it. Does this put any stress on your resources? I know it probably helps not just kind of going out and actively looking, doing it on a complaint basis, but you do have to do extra with the resources you have. How does that impact that?
Sure, and I mean, it's a great question. You know, anytime we get additional responsibilities without additional officers, of course, it creates, you know, greater workload. So that's why, you know, in addition to, you know, any of the other orders, we really rely on volunteer compliance from our citizens. The more our citizens voluntarily comply, the less the workload is on us. But it is a, you know, can be a strain if we don't manage it properly. So it adds one more call to the types of calls that we respond to. We don't shy away from that. We know that in our system of government, particularly under emergency orders, that local law enforcement plays a big role in that. We accept that. It's just up to us to try to manage appropriately.
All right, guys, we're going to let Chief Estes get back to it. I know Lieutenant Fishback had some housekeeping matters he wanted to circle back on. Chief, we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Just how busy you were this morning.
Thank you, Chief. All right, any other matters that we can speak on this morning? Questions from the group?
For the betterment of the community.
Well, for the betterment of...
Well, in that case...
Just to be clear, did Chief Jennings come back in before he realized that he was possibly in the building, and does that affect any of you all or anybody who had close contact with him?
Do we want to revert back to the deputy chief on that?
Yeah, he's not.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I just informational purpose.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Mark, and thanks, Lieutenant. Yeah, absolutely. You know, as soon as he learned that he had potential exposure to someone who tested positive, he immediately self-quarantined. Is that where you were going with that?
Was there a time before that when he came in to work and
There was a bit of a gap. You know, we talked about that. There was an event, I want to say it was on the 3rd, Secret Santa event, where he was out there providing gifts to, you know, some of the underserved children. You know, the encouraging thing at that point was that he was masked up fully, kept his social distance, and it was unbeknownst to him at that time during that Secret Santa event that he was exposed to someone who had tested positive. It wasn't until later that day, or evening rather, that he had learned that he was exposed and immediately put himself into self-quarantine. So he was conducting business. You know, he was just unaware that he was exposed for, you know, several hours during that day. And the minute that he did learn of that exposure, he shut it down. To Chief Estes' point, we've been on the phone or on conferences with Chief Jennings. He's still running all the meetings. You know, just a healthy guy. We hope he stays that way. The guy's a lion. He hasn't stopped working. He's got a number of events that he's going to cover virtually from home today, including a town hall, an internal town hall, speaking to the troops. He does that quite frequently to kind of get a barometer on what's going on in the department. Impressive guy, and the community should really rest assured knowing that they've got a guy like this at the helm.
The reason was anybody else upstairs or close by, you know, like what Chief Estes, who, you know, may have to worry about themselves. And, you know, the operations of the department.
Well, I'm not going to sit here with a straight face and, you know, say no, Mark. And, you know, we just know how unpredictable and how easily this thing is spread, and there are no guarantees that, you know, any of us are ever, you know, safe or fully protected from this kind of thing. I'd like to think that we're all okay. You know, you do, to Chief Estes' point, you have 20 officers that are out now. You know, 111 employees collectively that have been impacted, tested positive so far this year, despite all of those safeguards and measures and precautions that they take. You know, it's encouraging to know that 5% of our workforce was impacted by this, 5% too many. But it really pales in comparison when you look at the national average of most workforces, where they're looking at 10. You know, I think that 50% discrepancy, which is just a testament to just how seriously we take these precautions and protocols and the process, and how we're going to continue to do that. You know, we're fighting this thing together.
I think the question Mark is trying to ask is, out of those officers that are quarantining right now, how many of those are directly because of Chief Jennings?
Oh, I don't think we've been able to articulate, or I don't think we could say with any certainty that any have been exposed to Chief Jennings. I believe most of them were already out prior to Chief being tested positive. And I could circle back with you just out of an abundance of caution. I don't want to mislead anyone, but Chief Jennings was tested. He had his rapid test, and it came back yesterday. I believe the remaining 19 were already put out and tested positive prior to yesterday, if that answers your question. So the short answer is we haven't been able to connect Chief Jennings to any other tests that have been positive.
And did you have any other meetings on December 3rd besides the Secret Santas program?
I can go back and look. The most public meeting where we would have the greatest exposure, the most number of people, would definitely have to be that Secret Santa event that occurred on the 3rd. And again, it was unbeknownst to him at the time that he had been exposed, and later learned and then immediately shut it down. But I could circle back with his calendar. The other questions that I had gotten yesterday, and maybe you're interested, maybe you're not, about whether Chief Jennings has had any contact, direct contact with any elected officials since his exposure. He has not. I know that was some of the concern, especially from a couple of members of the press from yesterday. So I could say with certainty that I've been able to establish that he has not. So I don't know if that means anything to anyone in here, but in case it does, there's the answer on that one.
Thank you.
Got it. That's good. All right.